Ajek Kangkol Takung Palom Tikendavani TTV.
Assalamu alaikum, I'm Nujain Ismail Shafiq and welcome to the Fourth Estate. Good governance and curbing corruption can be paramount in establishing a sound democracy. To talk to us on this issue and other issues related to being a more accountable and transparent nation, we have with us tonight the Advocacy and Communications Manager of Transparency Maldives, Ayman Rashid. Ayman, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to talk about how Transparency Maldives has always been reported in the media consistently. We are known to make a stand on several issues that relate to governance and corruption. But before we dwell into that, I want to ask you what exactly Transparency Maldives is.
Transparency Maldives is affiliated with Transparency International. Transparency International is the global network and the coalition that fights against corruption. The key values of Transparency Maldives is obviously transparency, democracy, human rights. And Transparency Maldives, along with the larger Transparency International movement, strives to eliminate corruption from the daily lives of people. And we work by, we do not focus on specific cases. We work on we try to eradicate systematic issues that to promote transparency and eliminate corruption. And there are about over 90 Transparency International chapters all over the world, and we are one of the largest INGOs, and we're the largest NGO that works on governance and corruption in the world.
So how does Transparency Maldives actually fit in with the state here, with the Maldives here? What is your role exactly?
Our mandate is to increase transparency and to reduce corruption. Transparency Maldives' vision is to see a nation that is free from corruption. And Transparency Maldives was first established in 2007, and we commenced work in 2008, and we worked in local governance issues, election issues, political party financing issues, parliamentary transparency, parliamentary accountability. These are some of the main themes that we worked on, and currently we're working on freedom of information, right to information, climate governance, finance transparency, and we've also recently opened free legal advice center for witnesses and victims of corruption. So we try to address corruption as a systemic issue. We see corruption as if we, for example, we're not empowered legally to investigate corruption, such as the Anti-Corruption Commission or some of the state institutions. We believe that the only way to address corruption, the most important way that the civil society can address corruption is to close all the doors that lead to corruption. And to close the doors that lead to corruption, we have to address the systemic issues. We can pluck off one weed, but there'll be a lot of weeds growing there. We have to find a way so that no weeds can grow in between the grass. So that's how we address systemic corruption.
So you mentioned a lot of projects that you are involved in, a lot of things that you do. How exactly do you get your funding for all this?
All of Transparency Maldives' funding come from international sources, such as USAID, Australian aid, and we get a lot of funds from the embassies in Colombo, such as the Canadian Embassy, the Switzerland Embassy, the New Zealand Embassy, the British Embassy, and we also get a certain amount of funding from UNDP. All the programs in Transparency Maldives are financed by external sources and UNDP in Maldives.
Now, how do you apply for this funding?
We, like other NGOs in Maldives, we apply for grants that the UNDP or other sources publicize for. So we compete with other NGOs for the funds, and we write projects and we get the funds for specific purposes. For example, our Right to Information project is a grant from the United Nations Democracy Fund. And we're working with the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in implementing the project. We applied for the United Nations Democracy Fund, and we competed with many NGOs to win this proposal.
So within the Maldivian context, how much clout does Transparency Maldives have?
If you look at the history of NGOs in Maldives, the conventional NGO in Maldives would be an NGO that does, for example, some social work such as a grant competition or some development work in the island, such as helping set up street lights, and if there's a Eid or some celebration, we might have football matches or Eid celebrations. And there were few NGOs that were service-oriented, such as, for example, Care Society, that an NGO that caters for the disabled children, and Society for Health Education, an NGO that caters for thalassemia victims, and then screening for thalassemia and some of the other diseases. So this was the landscape we had in Maldives pre-2005, 2004, even 2003 even. The rise of democracy and advocacy NGOs, I would say, started around 2004, and Transparency Maldives started in 2007. We were a relatively late comer to compared to some of the advocacy NGOs and human rights NGOs that started in 2005, 2004. So Transparency Maldives we'd like to believe we're a leading voice, and we're one of the very few NGOs that work on advocacy. And we are the only NGO that does, for example, domestic elections observation in Maldives. In that regard, we're also the only NGO that for example, in a high court ruling, as far as we know, we're the only NGO that was cited in a ruling of a court. Okay. So that alone.
Which case was that?
This was the case that was back in 2009, when there was a dispute with whether the election commission should go for a re-election in the Timarfushi constituency, and so we'd like to believe that the public listens to us, listens to our positions, takes it very seriously. And we've had instances where, for example, the Parliament accepted over 90% of our recommendations to the Right to Information Bill. So it depends on the political situation. If it's not politically contentious, we've seen that the political leaders and policymakers listen to Transparency Maldives. They accept our recommendations. For example, we've worked a lot in elections, and we've had the Election Commission adopt a lot of our recommendations in administering elections.
I understand that Transparency Maldives is involved in creating a lot of awareness programs across the country in many aspects. Can you tell us a bit more about what areas you focus on?
A lot of the programs that we run, for example, the Right to Information Project, the Elections Project, the Climate Governance Integrity Project, and we've also concluded Civic Education Project. All of these projects have an awareness component, because we believe that if people don't demand good governance, and if people don't demand a transparent government, the onus on the state officials to provide good governance would be less. And also, to create accountability, we need to have a strong and empowered society. To meet those ends, we always try to empower the NGOs, the communities, etc., so that they can demand good governance and they can access the avenues within the laws, within the system, so that the government and other state actors are made accountable.
In terms of awareness, which areas or which area needs to be addressed the most in the Maldives?
This is a tough question, because I think across the board there's a need for awareness. When the 2008 constitution came, it was in a way dumped on the Maldivians. Usually in countries, social change demands systemic change. In Maldives, we've had the people demanding political and social change. However, the system that came was a system that was very alien to a lot of people. For example, a lot of people don't like corruption. People say that corruption, when I say people don't like corruption, we've seen that 57% of people say that the corruption has increased in the past 3 years in the last Global Corruption Barometer report that Transparency Maldives produced in 2011. The point I'm trying to make is it's all very new. Most of the countries have had decades to sort of test things, test waters, and see what works, what doesn't, and then adapt their systems. In Maldives, everything came wholesale. And there was no, I would say, chronological order. For example, we've had systems established without the resources. We've had, for example, an office established without proper resources for the office to function. We've had a decentralized system established, but with the prerequisites for a proper decentralized system to function wasn't there when the local governments were elected. So these are some of the issues that we have in Maldives. But having said that, while there are a lot of challenges, we also see a lot of opportunities for Maldives moving forward. We have a lot of very good systems if utilized properly will help us get to the vision of a better Maldives that a lot of Maldivians envision.
Can you tell me your most recent awareness campaign and how you actually got about doing that?
Our most recent education awareness campaign was the one that we focused for the NGOs, CBOs and public and communities in the islands with regard to the local governments, the Decentralization Act. And we found that a lot of the councils were not functioning as they were supposed to. And we felt that if the NGOs, the CBOs and if the public demanded better governance from the local governments, that they would create accountability. In addition to that, there are a lot of very good mechanisms and avenues in the Decentralization Act that the people can use to increase transparency in local governments, to make their local governments more efficient, etc. And these are some of the key messages that we took to the communities. We told them, look, these are the avenues in the law. You can use these avenues so that you can sit in, for example, the council meetings. By default, all council meetings are open. People can participate. And also the councils are required to conduct 2 public meetings every year. For example, they have to conduct a meeting in February and one in July. In the February meeting, they have to present the audited finances, the report of the previous year, and they also have to produce these documents, publicize these documents to the public 7 days before this meeting. And in the July meeting, the council has to propose a budget to the people for the next year, coming year, and they also have to produce a report of activities of the past 6 months. So these are things that people are not aware of as much as they should be, and these are avenues and these are tools that the people can use to create transparency and demand accountability from their local government. So this is the message that we took to the people, and it was very well received. In fact, we had local government officials, councillors, community people. We also had the members of the community, NGOs, sit together in one place and discuss what are the issues, what are the challenges, why the people perceive as the local government is not functioning as they should. So it was a very enlightening experience for us as Transparency Maldives. We learned a lot from the discussions, and we will definitely try to take these discussions and messages to other communities as well.
In general, how big is the gap of people, how much people should know and how much they know?
I don't think that this question has to be a lot more specific for me to be able to give you a direct answer. But I think there's a huge gap between what the law says, what the practices are, and what the people want.
All right.
So this is something that needs to be bridged. There has to be more close, there has to be a higher correlation between what the people want, what the law says, and what the practices are. Sometimes the law says something else and the practices are totally different. And sometimes what the people want, what the people demand, are not reflected in the practices of the state officials, or maybe not reflected in the law.
All right. I understand that Transparency Maldives has made several assessments and brought insight into the presidential elections of 2008, the previous one. Now that the next one is just around the corner, how will things be different this time around?
We hope things are different. The 2008 presidential elections was conducted in a very truncated time frame. It was a huge challenge, and given the circumstances, things went very well, I would say. Having said that, there are a lot of areas that need improvement going forward in the next election. For example, political party financing remains a huge issue, and the current political context and the climate again maybe might derail the whole process, given that the former president is at court. Basically, he may lose his candidacy, and that may lead to unrest in the country. So the context of the next presidential election is very different from the 2008, and the challenges are no less it is no less challenging the 2013 election is no less challenging than the 2008 presidential elections, I would say. And there are a lot of things that need to be done: the legal framework, electoral mechanisms, the complaints education processes. I would say the electoral administration by the Elections Commission has improved dramatically from the 2008, and I'm confident that the Election Commission has improved the administrative processes, but the surrounding issues such as campaign financing, the campaign issues in Maldives, and the political climate might derail the whole campaign process depending on how things go.
So can you tell me specifically which things are better this time around than before?
I think the Election Commission would be in a position be more ready, because they've gone through 3 cycles of elections, the presidential, parliamentary and local council elections, and so they would have more practice conducting elections. In addition to that, the voter registry was a huge issue in 2008, the first and second rounds as well, and in fact the election was almost called off in both rounds because there were so many issues with the voter registry back in 2008. But a lot of these issues would have been solved. But what has not been solved is, like I said, the political party financing, campaign issues, the complaints education processes, etc.
Well, you, Transparency Maldives, are also involved in gauging the people's perception on certain issues like this, like the presidential elections. So how do you think the public will perceive next year's election? How do they feel, how do Maldivians feel about another presidential election coming around?
Transparency Maldives will be conducting an electoral assessment that will look into a lot of things such as the legal framework, the practices, the electoral administration, the media environment in early February next year. So we will be in a better position to answer your question about how people perceive the changes from 2008 to 2013. We'd be in a better position to answer your question. But having said that, I think, like I said before, the Election Commission is better administratively equipped to conduct election. But there are huge challenges that might cause the election to go good or bad, or produce results that are worse than 2008 or better than 2008. We don't know yet.
Right. Your organization actually keeps a pulse on what the people are thinking. So can you make an educated best guess about how people are seeing the elections?
I would say we continuously talk with people and interact with communities, but in the absence of a proper assessment, it's not fair on anyone to make a comment on what the perception is. But I would be able to make a general comment on how people perceive corruption and systems in the Maldives. In last year's global corruption barometer that we did, we found that over 90% of the people felt that the corruption in the country had increased in the past 3 years. And but having said that, over 90% people also said that individuals can make a difference in the fight against corruption. And also we found that people felt that the most corrupt institutions were the parliament, followed closely by the judiciary and the political parties. These are very important institutions for democratic reform to carry the democratic agenda forward. So this shows that there's very little trust in the democratic institutions, and the huge challenge that the institutions have to gap the trust deficit.
Tell me a way or ways in which corruption can seep into the entire election process.
I think it's very clear. We've heard of allegations about parliamentarians switching sides, taking bribes. We've heard of allegations of corruption allegations leveled at people in senior positions in the executive. We've heard that the people say that the judiciary is corrupt, and certainly people feel that way, because our global corruption barometer survey shows that people don't trust, people perceive the parliament, the political parties and the judiciary to be most corrupt. So that in itself is very telling. And in Maldives, the type of corruption is very different from the type of corruption in most South Asian countries, in our neighboring countries. For example, in India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, there's a very high rate of bribing. The respondents to the survey said that, for example, in Bangladesh, 66% of people said that they had paid a bribe in the last year. In Sri Lanka and India, 50% of the people said that they paid a bribe. And in Pakistan, 55% people said that they paid a bribe. But in Maldives, only 6% of people said that they had paid a bribe in the last 6 months. But contrast the low level of bribing in Maldives to the high corruption perception index score in Maldives.